Welcome to Arise, Achieve Resilience, Inspiration, and Self-Empowerment, a speaker series presented by Vision Loss Alliance of New Jersey. Tonight, we are honored to have with us Lonnie Bedwell, motivational speaker, blind adventure athlete, military veteran, author, and the 2015 National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. A former Navy petty officer, Lonnie was critically injured in a 1997 hunting accident that instantly took his sight. Nevertheless, he raised 3 daughters as a single father, teaching them all to hunt and fish, and against all odds, teaching them to drive. Lonnie continues to challenge himself, ultimately becoming a renowned extreme sports athlete. He has kayaked some of the most challenging white water in the world and is best known for having completed the first blind descent of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. His latest conquest, Mount Everest, which is what we are all very excited to hear about, as well as all of his other adventures. Before we move on to tonight's amazing adventure, let us review the Zoom protocol. Our guest will cue you when it is time for questions. And at that time, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature. Let's review. For those of you who dialed in, the raise your hand feature is *9. *6 will mute and unmute you, giving you the opportunity to ask your question. If you're on the computer, Alt-Y, raise your hand, Alt-A, mute and unmute command. If you are using a Mac, use the Option +Y, the keyboard shortcut to raise or lower your hand, Alt+A to mute and unmute yourself. Using the Zoom app on the iPad, top right, select the More option on the top of the screen and flick down to raise your hand feature. On the iPhone, this feature is located at the bottom of the screen on the right side. Tonight, we will hear a personal, powerful story of overcoming adversity as it relates to teamwork, leadership, and motivation. And now it is my honor to introduce Mr. Lonnie Bedwell.
Hello, everybody, and thank you all so much. I appreciate you having me here once again. And I know some of you might have already heard my story, which I know has been recorded. If you haven't, to be able to go back and listen to that presentation. But I'm going to just kind of do a brief recap of some of that presentation before I jump into Everest. The main topic for tonight will be Mount Everest. As you heard, my name is Lonnie Bedwell. I live in Indiana. I was raised in a little town of Pleasantville, population 120 if you count the dogs and chickens. After high school and a couple years of college, I joined the military, and I enlisted in the Navy as a nuclear-powered machinist mate and volunteered for submarine service. And little did I know at the time how performing all the drills and missions would help prepare me for the next chapter of my life. But as you heard, on May the 4th of 1997, I lost my eyesight in a hunting accident when a good friend of mine accidentally shot me while we was turkey hunting. I took a full shotgun blast to the face at about 9 steps. Him and me were still really, really good friends. And I tell him all the time, I tell him all the time that he's still much better looking to me now than he used to be. And I probably wouldn't have went hunting with him if he just told me he's related to Dick Cheney. But while I was helping him, I was kind of unaware how my daughters were helping me. You know, they were the ones that put me back on my feet, if you will, to begin with. You know, they taught me, you know, blindness is a part of me, but it doesn't define me. Just like where I'm from, how I was raised, I'm in the military.
Loading video window, system dialog, hide thumbnail video.
Excuse me. It's a part of me, but it doesn't define me. You know, unless we allow it to define us. You know, and they taught me that, you know, to humble myself, to face the fear and to quit feeling sorry for myself. And they taught me and my buddy to kind of let go of what had happened in order to move forward in our lives. Well, in moving forward, my daughters, they started helping me by started push mowing and mowing around the outbuildings. It started out there, I was push mowing, I'll never forget, I was push mowing out late one night, well after dark. I was mowing around my pond in between the road and the bank. And I heard a car pull up and honk its horn. My neighbor rolled her window down. She said, Lonnie, said, you realize you're mowing in the dark? I thought, here's your sign. I got a chainsaw again, and I started cutting firewood, clearing fence rows, went horseback riding and fishing again with my cousins. And I even went hunting again the very next year with the guy I was in an accident with as I harvested my first turkey without eyesight. And as you have heard, I taught my daughters how to drive. It started out in the back pasture behind the house before we took off down the roads. I got into building houses, something I never did before I lost my eyesight. I do anything from everything from the ground up, framing, sheeting, wiring, roofing, you name it. And as a matter of fact, I've been on a roof for the last week, 2 different roofs, as a matter of fact. I was on one today. And, it kind of cracks me up, but people who see me on the roof for the first time, they often ask me, Lonnie, what are you doing on a roof? Standard answer, I'm on a roof. Help. But I didn't go to a VA blind rehab center until my youngest daughter graduated high school. And it was then that I went to Hines VA Blind Rehab Center in Chicago, and I was introduced to adaptive sports, and it started with snow skiing. The snow skiing then led me out to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, the 5th day I was ever on a set of skis in my life. And I went from skiing a little blue hills little green hills and bunny hills to skiing my very first blue slope, my very first black slope that day, chasing a cowbell. They started ringing a cowbell out in front of me that day, and it changed everything. And we've been clocked slightly over 60 miles an hour cowbell. The snow skiing then led me to an event where I was introduced to mountaineering, rock climbing, and kayaking. And the mountaineering, you're going to hear a little bit more coming up. The rock climbing, it took me to Devil's Tower, where I was the first blind person to ever climb Devil's Tower, our nation's first national monument. And then the kayaking, as you have heard, has led me to the Grand Canyon 4 times. As you heard, we was the first blind people to kayak, or I was the first blind person with my team to kayak the entire length of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. And on my second trip, I was joined by another person who was blind. Last trip by 4 others who lost their eyesight as a result of combat. And the trip before that, on my third trip, I was guided by a guy missing both legs above the knees, all 4 fingers on his left hand, his thumb and outer 3 fingers on his right hand, along with another gentleman who had PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And they were guiding me down all the hero lines on the rapids. But not only that, here's this guy missing his legs that was guiding me on all these side canyon hikes with these rocks and boulders and through these slots, and several times, several hundred feet above the canyon floor. And very seldom did he ever ask for a hand or a boost while he guided me. But he always laughed and smiled as we got to where we wanted to go. And he said, I love the challenge. I just love the challenge. Now back to the mountaineering and rock climbing, the mountaineering. It started by being a guinea pig for an organization out in Colorado, where they asked me, we try to see if we could summit one of the 14,000-foot peaks. And from there, I had a gentleman on the trip with me who lost his eyesight as a result of combat, and we decided to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro together. But prior to that trip, he developed spinal meningitis, causing him to lose his hearing as well, leaving not only blind, but deaf. And I wasn't going to climb without him, but he told me, the only way we could communicate was to spell letter by letter in his hand. So as I told him, his caregiver, what I said, you tell him I'm not going to climb without him. And I could hear him repeat every letter, every word. And then when he screamed at me, when he realized what I was going to say, he said, no, no, no. You climb it for me. You climb it for us. You climb it for all of us. And I knew that I had to go climb these mountains. Kilimanjaro then led to Mount Aconcagua, the highest peak in South America,
Oh, he's still
where I was
leaving?
joined by another blind
Not
veteran.
touching anything towards the property line. He said, oh,
And
no.
then it went to climbing Mount Denali up in Alaska. And as you heard, then we went to climb Mount Everest. And I'm going to change slide decks here real quick as I start talking about Mount Everest. Am I good?
I'm going that way right now.
Okay. Now, to start with, to go over to climb Mount Everest, it took a lot of preparation here at the house. I live in Indiana, flatland. So I got a Peloton bike, spent many hours on the Peloton, a vertical climber, a stepping machine. I got about a 7.5 mile loop out here that I go run or walk around, and I'll put a trekking pole in each hand, just literally go right down the middle of the road. Thankfully, I pass only about 3 houses in that 7.5 miles, very few cars. And I have run into a parked car in the process of doing that before. But I do that, or I put a weight vest on, ankle weights on, and I get out there and I hike it as fast as I can. And that's kind of what I do to prepare. We good? Mm-hmm. So then now we go to Mount Everest. I flew out of the United States. I went to the airport on April the 2nd of this year, to Indianapolis Airport. 41 hours later, after all the flights and all the delays and layovers, I landed in Kathmandu, Nepal. Spent a couple of days in Kathmandu, inventorying gear, making sure we had everything, and then kind of acclimating there. And then we flew up to the little town of Lukla. And Lukla is about, I say town, it's just a little bitty villa, if you will. The only way to get to Lukla is to hike in or to fly in. There's no road to Lukla. And it's at about 8,000 feet. Now, I thought all the way up from Lukla to the base camp, I thought I would be staying in tents. I didn't want to prepare. I didn't investigate. I didn't look into what it was going to be like. I didn't want to know. I just like to do these adventures, just kind of take them as they come. But little did I know, the introduction of solar panels changed that valley immensely. As we hiked up, there's no snow on the ground from Lukla all the way to base camp at those elevations. And all the way up through there with solar panels, we stayed in these little tea houses that had power. So we had hot water to take a shower in. We had ways to charge up our cell phones. There was no heated rooms, nothing like that. They had heated blankets on the beds if you needed them at night. And the higher you got, the more you needed that. And the higher you got up the valley, the less those amenities were. You had your start out with, we had our own individual showers in our rooms. I shared a little 10 by 10 room with another person the whole time. But since it was modernized by English, the food I thought would be eating lentils and beans the whole way, but we ate Western food. I could get pizza, I could get hamburgers, hot dogs, you name it, pork chops, steak, anything like that I wanted. I preferred to go and get a lot of the Nepali food. I just wanted to experience their food as we went up through there. And we got to stop and we got to go into some of the monasteries, a couple of monasteries on the way up there, and crossed a massive extension bridge, across a big valley. And all the way up, the only way that they get supplies up there for the most part is they fly them in a helicopter. But then from the helicopter pads, they're taken by yaks. To start with, in the lower sections, they have horses and then cows. And then you get to the middle section, you go a mixture of a cow, yak, crossbreed. And then up higher towards base camp, the only animals that can haul are the yaks. Not only are the yaks hauling the equipment, but so are the Sherpas. And something I was unaware of, that Sherpa is actually an ethnic group. The people in that valley are the Sherpa. Their first name, like Finju Sherpa, Tashi Sherpa. Sherpa is their last name. It's their ethnic group. The mountain guides that haul all this material are not always Sherpa. And the Sherpa themselves, they say, well, we kind of are disappointed that they got that name to apply to everybody that hauls material up the valley, because that's not always true. They were the first ones to do it. The Sherpa ethnic group was. And then a little town halfway up through there called Namche Bazaar used to be the trading center for Tibet and China and India, as they'd all come in and trade massively. And now it's just kind of more of the most modern little town, if you will, all the way up through there. The animals, the cows, everything just runs free. The dogs, everything runs free. They don't kill animals in that valley. They will eat meat, but nothing that they process themselves. They have to bring it in, which was just kind of amazing to me. And I used to use a trekking pole in each hand as I walk up through and just follow off the sound of everybody as we went up through all these little valleys. Lobuche, we went through Lobuche, town of Lobuche, on the way up to base camp. Base camp is 17,000 to 17,500 feet. There is absolutely nothing at base camp, zero, not a single building, tent, nothing until the climbing season. And then during the climbing season, it's just inundated with tents, big tents, small tents of all sizes. The population at base camp is about 2,500 to 3,000 people, with all the Sherpas, the guides, just everyone that cooks. When we got up to base camp, and I said from 17 to 17.5 because it spread out from that elevation, and that's the start of the glacier field on Everest, right where the base camp is at. At my tent, my own personal tent was about 10 foot long. It had a 3-foot opening vestibule to get into to begin with, about 7 feet wide. And then you entered a second little zip section that was 7 by 7. I had a big cot or foam pad to sleep on. And like I said, I could stand up in it. It was a good 7 feet high, plenty of room to store all my gear and everything else. No power at this point. Once you get to base camp, there's zero power. Now they do have Wi-Fi that it comes in intermittently. They set up these towers and stuff that you can intermittently get Wi-Fi if you pay for it. And the food, once again, a huge tent, your cooking tent, and then a big tent for us to gather in as a group and eat in and visit. There's some of the outfitters there that will have tents big enough to support 80 to 90 people. Our group consisted of 5 of us, 4 of us climbing Mount Everest and 1 climbing Mount Lhotse. And then along with all of our guides and our cooks. But after we got to base camp and spent about 3 days, and all the way up to from Lukla base camp, we were joined by trekkers, and that's a big thing over there. Is people that just trek the whole valley and go to base camp, and then they turn around, and they go back and fly home. We were joined by 16 other people that were trekkers, but after they left, we dropped back down to the town of Lobuche to climb Mount Lobuche. And Mount Lobuche is 21,000 feet high. So we summited Mount Lobuche, would come back, and then we went back up to Mount Everest base camp. And from Lukla to base camp, it took us 9 days. We took 9 days, and you climb slow so to give your body time to acclimate to the elevation. And then you also climb high like Mount Lobuche and go back down for the same reason. You go high, back down, go high, higher, back down. So after climbing Mount Lobuche, we went back to base camp, rested for about 3 days, and then we went up the route you would take to climb Mount Everest. We went to Camp 1, Camp 2, and Camp 3. Camp 1 is about about 19,000 feet. Camp 2 is approximately 21,000. Camp 3 is 23,000 feet, the highest I've ever been in my life, 23,000 feet. Then we dropped back down to base camp again. Now, I'm kind of going to talk about going through the sections from base camp up to the summit all in time. But after we dropped back down to base camp that second time, we had to wait 17 days on a weather window to summit. But I'm going to talk about going through from base camp to Camp 1 in two kind of different sections. The first time I went up through it, go to Camp 3, and then the last time I went to go to the summit. From base camp to Camp 1, you go through what they call the Khumbu Icefall. And the Khumbu Icefall is a section of the glacier during the season that moves, and it moves about 3 feet a day as it gets warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer. And as it moves, it opens up these crevasses or these splits in the glacier. And some of these splits are just inches wide to several feet wide. And as I went up to the first time, we crossed, I'm going to say, well over 40 crevasses. And if the crevasse was opened up more than approximately 2 feet, they'd put a section of ladder there that you could step on the rungs of the ladder. I'd put the front of my foot, the ball of my foot, with my crampon spikes onto one rung, and then drop the back of my heel onto the other. And they had little ropes that you could kind of put tension on. You couldn't put weight on them. They wouldn't support you that way, but you could put tension on to kind of help balance you. And I'd cross, and I'll not forget, as we was going up to get to some of these crevasses, we'd climb these little steep, what they call head walls. And we'd go up the head wall, and the whole way, the Sherpa, and they were Sherpa that set the route from the base camp all the way to the summit. And thankfully for those Sherpas, they'd set, as you'd go up, they'd set anchors in the rocks and in the ice about every 100 feet or every 150 feet. And they'd have a rope that went between all these anchors. And for safety purposes, we clip on to the rope. So the maximum fall you could have would be approximately 100 to 150 feet. Now, if you was going horizontally, you'd slip off the side, you might only drop 10 to 15 feet, 8 feet, whatever, depending on where you're at in that stretch. But I'll not forget as we was going up, I just listened to the sounds of the footsteps, and that's how I'd follow. And occasionally, if we get to a crevasse, they'd tell me it was coming up on a crevasse, and I would take both my trekking poles and put them out in front of me, find the edge of that crevasse, get as close to it as I could, stick them across to the other side if it was a small one, find out where I had to step, and then step across that crevasse. And for me, that was just mind-numbing. It's just so stressful and just wore me out. And as we'd also go up through there, that section of the Khumbu Icefall is probably the most dangerous section overall, because as it was moving, it wouldn't only open up those crevasses, it push up what they called seracs, which are just chunks of ice and rock. And some of them would just be small to as big as a 3-story building. And unfortunately, this year was the deadliest year in the history of Mount Everest, and the coldest and windiest in over 30 years. There were 17 people that perished on the mountain this year, and the first 3 that perished was going through the Khumbu Icefall, and one of those seracs fell and created an avalanche and buried them, and their bodies were never recovered. But also, as we was going up through there, like I said, one of these crevasses that really comes into mind, the first time I crossed it, there was a full-length section of ladder, 10 feet across this crevasse. Then we went across, and I'd have to step across and step across and step across. The first time going up through the icefall, it took me 12 and a half hours to go from base camp to Camp 1. The average sighted person took about 7.5 to 8 hours. The Sherpa would get loaded in about 3.5 to 4 hours. They were incredible. Excuse me. Coming down the first time, back down through the icefall, it took me 5.5 hours to go back down. And that one section of ladder that I was talking about had a 10-foot section. The crevasse had opened up enough that the upper section of that ladder didn't reach all the way across the crevasse and was suspended on ropes. And you had to step off the crevasse onto this ladder, which was kind of swinging a little bit back and forth to get down the route. So that was just mind-boggling in itself. And then there'd also be points on this where going across some of the crevasses, you'd have to step across the crevasse onto this little ice bridge that might be 12 inches, or a little stump, might be 12 inches wide, and then turn and step across another crevasse. And for the sighted person, it was just literally step, step. For me, naturally, it was, okay, find it, get out on it, get your balance, turn, and step again. So what took a sighted person literally 10 seconds to cross could sometimes take me a minute, 2 minutes or more to cross. It was just crazy. And then also, it's kind of funny is you'd climb, you'd go up through that ice fall. You'd typically try to go from like 2 in the morning till about 10 or 11 o'clock in the afternoon. Because after 11 o'clock in the afternoon, it started getting so warm sometimes that the ice fall would become even more unstable than it normally already is. And there'd be more of those seracs fall and stuff like that. So you try to climb during the most stable period of the ice fall. And then it'd take, after it heated up and it went back dark, it'd take till about 2 in the morning to freeze back to where it'd be somewhat stable again. But it'd be kind of funny as you'd be going through, as we climbed it at night, you could hear, and actually for me at all times, you could hear some of these seracs falling, and you'd be, okay, that's in front of us. Or it'd be up above us, and we're like, okay, is it going to stop before it gets to us? Or that one's behind us. You're always thinking, boy, I hope no one's getting hurt by this falling. And some of the sighted people tell me when a big enough serac would fall, if it was close enough to us, they said it looked like fireworks going off in the night, because all the rocks bouncing off of each other just sparked and just caused all these sparks flying into the air. And it's just crazy, just crazy. But then as we went on up from there to Camp 1 to Camp 2, that was probably the most easy section, if you will, from base camp up for me. There were some crevasses that were out and you could walk out and around them, but I was probably keeping time or doing just as good as any sighted people, and sometimes even better, because they would charge out, they would charge out and go fast and rest, and charge out and go fast and rest. And that's just kind of like a steady little mule, if you will, just taking a trekking pole, listening to the sound and just moving, a slow, steady pace. So when it comes to time to rest, I didn't have to rest as much as they did. And we actually ended up going faster from Camp 1 to Camp 2 than I would say 50% or more of the sighted trekkers or sighted people climbing up the ice fall, or excuse me, going through that section. And the head walls. But at Camp 2, it was probably the second biggest camp that you had. Camp 1, Camp 3, and Camp 4 are just these little 2-man tents. You just jump in with all your gear, room to do anything while you're in the tent. And one of my tent mates, he kind of laughed at one time. He said, man, I don't know how many ducks and geese it took to fill all this down, but we got a tent full of down. We probably had 1.5 feet between our sleeping bags. I had one -20-degree sleeping bag and one -40-degree sleeping bag, along with all this other down coats and gear and pants and you name it to support to go up through there. But it was kind of crazy at that. But once we got to Camp 2, the first time up, we like I said, we just spent a couple of days to rest, and then we'd go on up to Camp 3. But at Camp 2 and at base camp, but especially at Camp 2, that's the highest point that they can go and land a helicopter, put somebody in it, and fly them off the mountain. Above Camp 2, they could go slightly above Camp 3, but the only way they could pick someone up would be by a static line, a static cable that hung off the bottom of the helicopter. They'd clamp it to us. And you knew that if that helicopter went above Camp 2, things probably weren't good. They would fly people off that were severe frostbite. And they said there was so much frostbite on the mountain this year, it's just overwhelming. But then also, you could tell if they were flying somebody off that didn't make it, because they'd literally sit there, and it's very humbling to me. They'd say, well, Lonnie, that person is upright, so they're still alive. If they weren't, if they were hanging by their ankles, that they had perished, unfortunately. And as you're sitting there at Camp 2, you sitting there and you're thinking, we're getting ready to go there. Why didn't they make it? We're getting ready to go there. But on my first trip up from Camp 2 to Camp 3, you go up a little section and then you go up what they call the Lhotse face. Really steep section of the mountain. And we're using a cinder, we're sliding it up the rope, and then trying to kick the tips of your crampons in to get purchase to take a step up. And on that first trip up, they hollered at me and said, look out, look out, look out. There was a rock fall that occurred above us. And you're supposed to try to get down as fast as you can to the snow and let everything hopefully bounce over you. But just before I could drop down, rock went between my arms, underneath my face, hit my feet, especially hit my right foot, and I thought it broke my foot, but collapsed my right boot. Thankfully, they were hard shelled boots, and it just collapsed my boot, and it numbed my foot, but it was just, thankfully, just a big time stinger. But we just kept ascending on up, got to Camp 3, and the first trip up was just brutal going up to Camp 3 because there's very little snow. It was black ice. It was slick. It was hard to get your feet to purchase and get a bike to go on up the mountain. Then after that, like I said, we dropped back down to base camp. Going up to the summit the second time, as we went through the Khumbu Icefall, that section I was talking about, that one main section, to start with too, going up to the base camp, I want to kind of back up. We just got onto the icefall, and here was these Sherpas carrying down a lady that was just completely, the altitude affected her, and they were carrying her down and getting her off the mountain. And then we got to this one head wall, and I got up to this gentleman, and I said, hey, sir, can I get around you? There are people from all over the world there, all over the world. And I asked, can I get around you? I'm blind. I can't see him. He didn't respond, nothing at all. So I had to feel my way and kind of work my way around him. And when I got to the top of that head wall, I got talking to a Sherpa guide. And that gentleman had been at that one location, halfway up this little head wall for 6 hours. He wouldn't go up. He wouldn't go down. He was just stuck there. No way in the world he was going to make the summit. But he was in a place where they could get him off. And I'm sure they did, because it wasn't there when we come back down. But then that one crevasse that I crossed that had that one section of ladder, but this time it had 3 sections of ladder, end to end to end, 30 feet across this crevasse, approximately 25 to 30 feet across this crevasse. And we go up, and it took me 11.5 hours to get to Camp 2. And then we put oxygen on to go up from that point to Camp 3. Normally, you don't have to put oxygen on until you get to Camp 3, to go above Camp 3. At approximately 24,000 feet is what they call the death zone. The oxygen gets so thin that it's hard to sustain life for long periods of time. But all the time as we was going up here, excuse me, as we was going up the mountain, a lot of my guides, they just laughed. I hear them laugh. And I knew after the first couple of times what they were laughing about. I said, did it again, didn't you? I said, yeah. And they were telling me, it's such a thing. They'd be behind me and they'd say, dude, why don't you just simply lift your foot up another inch, or move it a half an inch, or an inch to the left, or an inch to the right, or 6 inches to the left or right. And there would be great purchase where someone else had stopped or had taken a step before. And then they'd be like, duh, you can't see to do that, to know where to put their foot, to know where to put that foot. And for me, it's mentally exhausting on top of being physically exhausting. But having that oxygen, that supplemental oxygen on going up the head wall the second time was huge help. It really was. Even though my mask, they didn't have it turned up very much to begin with. Now, couldn't get full air. And finally, they turned it up because I kept telling them, I said, guys, I can't breathe enough. I can't breathe enough with this mask on. And they give me a little bit more air, and it was much easier getting up to that camp, to Camp 3. We spent a night at Camp 3. Then we curved around a section, headed on up the mountain to Camp 4. And you kind of side hill a section of the mountain going from Camp 3 to Camp 4. And there'll be sections where it's literally about 8 inches wide, and you can reach up to your right because you're curving around with the steep side of the mountain to your right, and it drops off to your left. and you can literally just kind of reach out and hit the side of the mountain. And there was a few sections where I didn't get the right footing. I just slipped down the side of the mountain. The rope, thankfully, clipped onto that rope. I dropped down 8-10 feet or whatever to slide down. I turn around, climb back up to the trail, and keep on going around to Camp 4. Excuse me. Once we got around to Camp 4, we spent a night, and at Camp 3 and Camp 4 are the only two camps that I had to eat freeze-dried food. I was stunned at that. You know, they was able to cook food at all the other camps. And I was just shocked, you know, that that's the only places that I had to eat freeze-dried food. 3 meals, one at Camp on Camp 3 the night we stayed there, and 2 at Camp 4 the day we got there and the day we got back down from the summit. But as we sat there at Camp 4, you know, I knew, like, okay, because we had, like I said, we had spent 17 days waiting for a weather window. The weather window, you know, at the summit, there'd been 125-mile-an-hour winds, sustained winds, and just snow, and you name it. And it's just crazy. And you're sitting there, are we going to get a window? Are we going to even get a chance to climb this? And once the weather window opened up, excuse me, there's just a mad rush. It is April the 13th when the weather window opened up. And there was just a massive rush. And our guide held us back. He said, we're not going yet. We're not going. And they said, just looked like ants as everyone was going up the mountain, just packs and packs of people. And that's another big reason why so many people got frostbite, along with the weather, the wind, is because you couldn't just constantly move. And the frostbite would come more often when you just be standing and waiting and standing and waiting. So we waited. And as people that summited were coming back down, we waited those extra few days to go up. And, and they were coming back down, some that made it and some that didn't. But once we got to Camp 4, you know, we didn't have that much traffic going up. And from Camp 4 to the summit, not only we waited again, because normally you would do what they call a mountaineer start. You'd get up about midnight or 11 or 12 o'clock, midnight 1, and you'd start toward the summit. My guide decided to wait again. And that little bit of mass that went out before us, you know, it was really cold and windy on our summit. Not super windy on our summit day. You can't go above about 20, 25 knot winds, 25 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour winds, a little over. You can't climb above that. But he waited. He wanted to try to get a little bit warmer. And the average person, it took about 14 hours to go to the summit and back down to Camp 4. It took me 14 hours just to get up. But I'm sitting there on the mast and I'm going up the mountain. And about halfway from Camp 4 to the summit is a place called the balcony, just a little flat section. And people take a brief rest there and typically eat a meal or something to that effect. But just before we got to the balcony, you know, there was people coming back down, some of them that I knew, very experienced mountaineers, some of them. And they'd speak to me as they saw me coming back. And I'd ask them, did you make it to summit? And a couple of them, no, we didn't make it. Our eyelids froze shut about 500 feet from the vertical feet from the summit. Or no, I didn't make it for this reason or that reason. And I'm sitting there in my mind thinking, oh my gosh, you know, these guys didn't make it, and I've got to go. And, you know, the whole time I'm sitting there just thinking, you know, I've got to do this. I knew it was close to Memorial Day, and all the sacrifices that give me the ability to do that, all the people that sponsored, all the people that follow what we do and support. It's just like, I've got to do this. My family, my friends, just take another step. But between seeing all those helicopter flights taking people off, and now watching people come back down, and people talking about frostbite, and, you know, I was kind of fortunate in some ways because they'd have goggles on, and just any exposure on your skin could get frostbitten. I could just literally just pull everything down over my face. And there was a couple of people asked, dude, why don't you take that off your mat? You know, take it off so you can see. You know, they kind of get rude, and people, my guys, oh, he can't see, you know, he can't see. So they just kind of laughed. But so then we went up and we crossed across this section and we got to the summit. But literally about 4 hours for me from the summit, 750 50 vertical feet, my oxygen mask started not working properly. I couldn't get a full breath. And my team had kind of separated, and I couldn't get a full breath. So by the time I got to the summit, my entire chest was just hurting. And I asked them before we ever left base camp if we was going to have spare masks. And they said, yeah. So when I got back to the summit, our entire team was there again. I said, hey, can I have one of the spare masks? They said, we didn't bring one. I'm like, you're kidding me. I said, I can't breathe. Everyone was wanting to celebrate, but it's still cold. It's negative 44 degrees, cloudy and snowing. And I'm like, I can't breathe, guys. I can't breathe. One of the Sherpa took his mask off, traded me mask. First time I could take a full breath in about 4 hours. He put my mask on. He said, I can't get this mask to work either. I'm out of here. He went down the mountain. We took a few pictures, got layers on, but not really good pictures because I was wanting to breathe. I was finally breathing again. And then we headed down the mountain. About an hour and a half from getting back to Camp 4, my second oxygen mask started to fail. And I was the only person on the team that had an oxygen mask fail. And we actually come upon another gentleman who was in the process of not making it, unfortunately. And just they told us to go ahead around. Part of our guides went to help him, and I felt so bad, not only for him and his family, but for the guides trying to get him down the mountain. But they made us go on around because they said, we don't need to compound this what's going on. Shortly after we got around him, he unfortunately didn't make it. And since my second oxygen mask failed, I got back down to within about 100 feet of base camp. And like I said, I just sat down again because I was resting more since I couldn't breathe properly. And I didn't realize it when I sat down that I was literally within 100 feet of my tent. And I sat down right beside a second person that didn't make it. And I didn't know that until I got up and my guides told me. We were supposed to cross over and do Lhotse, but I told my guides, I said, look, I've had 2 oxygen masks fail, 2 people perish, my trekking pole break. I'm going on down. I've been given the pass I've been given. So we went straight from Camp 4 all the way down to Camp 2. We rested a day, then we went through the Khumbu Icefall. And that last time going through the Khumbu Icefall, those 40 crevasses turned into well over 100 crevasses. And like I said, there was one crevasse we got to that was about 4 feet wide. And they told me, said, well, there's a crevasse here. You got to cross about 4 feet. And I thought, okay, there's going to be a ladder. They said, but they told me that there's no ladder. You have to jump it. I'm like, oh my gosh. And at this elevation, all my gear on, I'm tired. Said, all right. So I couldn't get a run because I couldn't see it. So I get as close as I can and I jump. And while I'm in the air, I heard just a collective gasp out of my group. My right foot hits and I kind of lean forward and stand. And I sit up and went, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? They're like, dude, you just barely made that. But we did make it. We went on down to base camp. And at base camp, we finally celebrating. And we did it. We did it. But it's for so many reasons. And I remember telling one of the guys, he asked me, he said, you ever going to climb it again? I said, you could give me $1 billion and I'll never do it. And he said, yeah, right. You don't know what $1 billion is. I said, I know I'm a little jack from Indiana, but that's a lot of money, but I'll not do it again. I told him, I said, you don't realize the reason I did it was not for me. It was for us. My buddy lying there who's deaf and blind, and all of us, everyone that sacrificed so much. I couldn't find it within me to push that hard again. And then we came on down and we did it. But I think about all those people and all those groups, and I think Helen Keller said it best. And in my other presentation, I said it, but I think Helen Keller said it best. The only thing worse than being blind is having eyesight with no vision. And we climb these mountains and we kayak these rivers and we climb these rock walls and ski. Why? To prove it can be done. The trust, the teamwork it takes to do it all, the kayaking it takes to do it all. And I encourage you all, think about that. We all have so much more value, so much more worth, and we can do so much more than we think we can if we'll just try. Believe in ourselves, believe in each other, help each other. Like I said, the buddy lying in the hospital bed, we wanted to prove the unlimited potential that's in each and every one of us. And there's hardly nothing beyond us if we'll simply unite for a common goal. So I encourage you all to do that, to think outside the box, to live a life that people tell us a lot. Oh, you can't do that. Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can. So I'm going to open it up to questions now, and thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lonnie. Any questions, comments? It was a very powerful story,
Yeah,
adventure.
I can't find my raise hand.
Go ahead, Dora.
Hi, my name's Dora. So I actually was up there as well, but I was sighted 15 years ago. And I succumbed to altitude, I'd say around 15, 16. I did eventually get up to 17 into the base of Lhotse. But my question to you, like it's just mind-boggling that you did this. Being a flatlander, how did you, I know now they do have masks to train for altitude. Were you just genetically fortunate that you didn't have trouble till, clearly above, 18, 19, 20,000 feet, where I was, and I succumbed and being taken care of doctors, two people who just went up to base camp and down died while I was there that week. And you got so much further, and you had that extra stress of going over these crevasses, which is taking your energy and your breathing. I just can't, it's just unbelievable. How did you, were you just fortunate with that, with your oxygen?
Yeah, I have to say I definitely fortunate, blessed with that. And then, like I said, as you well know, we truly took our time. And now staying at base camp for 17 days was not good. That was not good. That was too long.
Yeah.
You just could literally feel your strength getting zapped away and your energy getting zapped. And I lost 17 pounds on the trip. One of my teammates lost 18, another 24, and 125. So I lost the least of everybody, but I probably had the least to lose. So,
Yeah, I just wonder how you even stayed fueled for that kind of energy.
Man, you just, as you well know, you have to make yourself eat. Even because the higher you get in altitude, you tend to get to where you're not hungry. And but we truly, I ate quite a bit. I did eat a lot and put in a lot of calories. And yeah, then when I got back home, I put in too many calories. Now I got to work on getting rid of the calories I put on.
My hat's off to you. Incredible feat for any living person to do, let alone with the extra challenges that you faced.
Well said.
Thank you.
Tracy, you have a question. Tracy, you can unmute. Tracy. Okay, Tracy, you hang in there. Okay, there you go. Whoa. All right. Tracy, you were unmuted and you muted back. So I'm going to give you time to unmute yourself, and we're going to move on to Isha.
Hi. I just wanted to say that was an amazing story. I definitely could feel your passion through you telling your story, and it was very inspiring. I mean, I'm a adventurous person, but I don't know if I would be that adventurous because I'm afraid of heights and I don't like the cold. But that was definitely a great story and very inspirational. And I'm glad you achieved what you wanted to achieve, even with all the challenges you met with. And I don't know if you mentioned it or not. How many people were in your group?
My little team that went to the summit, I had two friends of mine, that Michael and Brian, that were kind of part of my team, and then another gentleman, another Michael, that's originally from Germany, lives in Canada, that was part of our team. And then we had our main mountaineering guide and some Sherpas. That was our team that went to the summit.
Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't say too. My buddy Brian lost one of his toes to frostbite, and unfortunately, he told me yesterday he's probably going to have to get a little bit more of it removed. Unfortunately, they thought the part that they took off would be enough, but he might have to get some more removed, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Alicia. Tracy.
Yes, hello. I do apologize. I'm using my headset and my Mr. Jaws does not cooperate with the functions with the Alt
Mr.
A.
Jaws. No problem.
You
No
have to
problem.
give him respect, because he does what he does. And I appreciate it, But Lonnie, I loved your story. So it felt like I was listening to a Netflix movie. I was over here like on the edge of my seat listening to your adventure. And I think that it is so amazing. I would like to consider myself an adventurous person as well, but I do not think that I will ever do what you've done. So kudos to you, and I'm so glad that you made it back safely as well. Now, my question to you, because here's this one thing that I do want to experience. I would like to skydive.
Mhm.
Have you ever done that?
Yes.
And
Yes.
how was the experience?
Cool. Yeah. I've only done it tandem. Unfortunately, I would love to do it enough to where they'll let me jump on my own, because that's when I think it would be a real thrill. I convinced my guide. I said, "Hey, can we somersault out of the plane when we do this?" And so he's like, "I'm not supposed to."
Somersault.
Yeah, so we somersaulted out of the plane, and yeah, and he kind of told me, he said, "You're not nervous, are you? Naturally, you're clipped to him." I said, "Not really." I said, "How can you tell?" He said, "Because your heart rate, I could feel your heartbeat and your breathing." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, I'm strapped to you, and I figure you don't want to kick the bucket here, so
Right.
so if we just did, but if I jumped on my own, where it was up to me to figure out, did that chute open right? Like going the right path, how far is the ground? That's when the adrenaline would really hit me, and I'd love to do it enough to where they'd let me do it.
Wow. And where does one look for an activity like that? Like, where would I find something like that
Pretty
in
much
New Jersey?
Yeah, pretty much. Honestly, pretty much every state has jump sites, jump stations. Most of them do.
I've heard they even have
And they're
indoor
smaller
skydiving.
typically. That they do, and you get into a tunnel, and it's just a big wind tunnel, and you can experience that. And I'd really recommend you doing that, because that's totally safe.
I'll start off
I mean,
there. But thank
gonna
you so
fall.
much for sharing your story and your motivation. I like to share with people. One of my mantras is to trust yourself, believe in yourself, and love yourself, because there's nothing that we cannot do once we set the plan.
Yes. Yeah. I think I said this in the last thing too, but to me, I love acronyms, and that the three emotions that hold us back the most are, in my opinion, I call them emotions. I touched base about it, was that foolish pride, fear, and pity. None of us have ever got to where we're at in life. Nobody, without somebody helping them, teaching them, guiding them along the way. And there's absolutely nothing wrong to ask for a hand up, not a hand out, but a hand up, and then you pay it forward. But you and there's nothing wrong with being proud of what you do. But when you take that pride to a level that is foolish, and you refuse to ask for help or guidance or to humble yourself, well, that's foolish in my opinion. But that pride leads into fear. FEAR, false evidence about reality. if I ask for help, they're going to think I'm weak, or they're going to think I'm this, or they're going to think I'm that, or they're going to make fun of me, or I might get hurt, or just whatever reason it is that you don't do, whatever. And like I said, it's kind of false. Most people want to help you, or they're happy to help you, especially as adults. And, they want to see you. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking. And most of the time, you're not going to get hurt. You take all the precautions you can, and, most of the time you're not. But then all that foolish pride and fear leads into the worst one of all, in my opinion, is pity, P-I-T-Y. I like to say is poor information to yourself. Whatever it is that makes you feel so sorry for yourself that you basically stop living. I'm worthless because I'm blind. I'm not a man because I'm blind. I can't do this because I'm blind. I can, whatever the reason, it's not just blindness, but whatever reason it is that makes you feel so sorry for yourself that you won't do it, or people won't allow you to do it. And so I think, you got to control your mind. As a good gentleman told me one time, control your mind, not let your mind control you, and just go for it. And that leads into another acronym. To me, to overcome adversity, you break it down. ADVERSITY. So get over these three things, the A and the D. Just like the first bite of an elephant seems overwhelming. First step up a mountain seems overwhelming. First thing you do, acknowledge. Okay. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be different. It's going to be difficult. But once you acknowledge it and kind of come to that accept you to do the VER, visualize every route you can take, every route, and then it gives you the S, what my daughters gave me, the S, the strength to stand up and to step to where the ITY into your future, the things you can do, the life you can live. So that's my philosophy on all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Ken. I'll give you a second or two. Ken Brandt.
Yep, sorry, I was having a little trouble unmuting. Lonnie, I loved your whole story and everything. It's great. I was wondering how you compare the challenges. I have two questions. One, how do you compare the challenges of kayaking and mountain climbing? And second, what are you doing next?
To me, mountaineering is my least favorite of all the things I do, because it's breaking it down is so hard for me in so many ways. It's just, climb to that next ridge, that next rock, that next tree, that next boulder, that next whatever, breaking it down instead of just, take a step, to where kayaking and rock climbing, vertical rock climbing are my two favorites. And kayaking, I think, because, in my kayak, things are so dynamic most of the time, in the whitewater especially. Now, I love just paddling around on the lake too, following sound and stuff. But it's me in that kayak. Just like a sighted person sees to know how to turn the steering wheel, I use sound to know how to point that kayak. But it's me in that boat with my paddle, no one else controlling it but me. And, it's just hop up, charge. And it's amazing how much you can hear over those rapids. Some people are kayaking with headsets now. They're getting to where they're being more affordable. I personally just use raw sound, if you will, of people yelling. I don't use a headset, and that's it. And now what's next on my agenda? I don't know. What do you want to do? That's what I tell people. What do you want to do next? There's so many different things out there on the horizon, and we're hoping to be able to go to finish the 7 summits. Don't know that we'll be able to start. We're hoping to go to Antarctica this winter. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, but we've already done 4 of the 7 summits. We've got Antarctica, Europe, and Australia left. And we hope to do that and also ski to the North and South Pole and to complete what they call the Polar Slam, which is at this point has not been done by a blind person. But I had no desire to ever do them. It just inherently happened. I mean, my buddy that lost his eyesight and hearing asked me about Kilimanjaro. Another blind vet asked me if I'd join him on Aconcagua. And then the BVA, they called and asked me if I would, next time I did something kind of epic, if I'd join with them. 3 days later, I get called by Michael and Brian, who was sitting at Everest Base Camp the year before. And they said, hey, let's climb Everest. And between getting asked by the BVA to do something to bring attention and awareness to the BVA, Blind Veterans Association, I just kind of lowered my head and thought, oh, crap.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right, let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Mhm.
Well, it sounds like first you talked about the reasons why you didn't want to go back up Everest, and then now you're talking about climbing other mountains. It seems like a little contradiction, but you somehow seem to be looking forward to it.
Yeah. The highest mountain, the others, you don't take any of these mountains for granted. Don't misunderstand me. But of the 3 remaining mountains, the highest one is 19,000 feet, not 29,000 feet. I don't want to do any
Big difference.
Yeah, big difference. Yeah. But like I said, you don't take any of them for granted, because I fell through an ice bridge at 14,000 feet on Mount Rainier one time. And so, yeah.
Well, good luck with all that.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments for Lonnie? So what I'd like to say in closing, Lonnie Bedwell is an advocate, active volunteer for people with disabilities and veterans. And his mission is to motivate and inspire everyone to embrace life with confidence and courage, no matter what challenges they face. He accomplishes this by the way he lives his life and sharing his story with others. Mr. Lonnie Bedwell, on behalf of Vision Loss Alliance and our program participants, we really thank you so much for sharing your emotional journey and amazing adventures with us tonight. I can't thank you enough for being with us. And everyone, I would like to just remind you that VLA&J has a YouTube channel, and this is the Arise Speaker Series. So you can hear this presentation on that YouTube channel. Lonnie, thank you for being with us.
Thank you all so much. And yeah, I appreciate each and every one of you. And don't ever question your value, your worth, ever. Believe in yourselves, believe in each other, and enjoy. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Be
Thank
safe.
you. Thank you.
Stay well.
Yes.
Have a good night.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Lonnie.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
night.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.